Okay, good morning, everyone. I see it's 10:30 and it's time to begin our session. So welcome to today's Safety Connection. And thank you all for joining us. Our session today is on the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development, or the MLITSD Noise Campaign for 2026 to 2027. And good morning. My name is Tony Volpato, and I'm a specialized consultant in occupational hygiene at WSPS. And I'm pleased to be your host this morning and presenting with Christina St. Pierre from the Ministry of Labor this morning. Many of you likely will recognize Christina from our previous safety connections on the MLITSD occupational hygiene campaigns the last couple of years on chemical safety. This one is all about noise. So Christina is the provincial hygienist at the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development. She leads the group of occupational hygienists within the ministry and responsible for enforcement of the Occupational Health and Safety Act and its regulations. She joined the ministry in 2013 as a hygiene consultant and became the provincial hygienist in 2022. Prior to joining the ministry, Christina was an occupational hygienist with the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. She started her career in the nuclear industry and also has experience in private consulting and performing the occupational hygiene surveys and laboratory analysis. Christina has a Master of Engineering degree in occupational hygiene from the University of Toronto. She has been a certified industrial hygienist for over 20 years. So welcome, Christina. And just quick bit about myself. I joined WSPS over 25 years ago now as a health and safety consultant, providing a variety of health and safety services, such as conducting hazard assessments and facilitating training on a variety of health and safety topics, such as our certification training for the JHSC, WHMIS, violence and harassment, just to name a few. And back in 2019, I was very excited to earn the Certified Industrial Hygienist designation and currently provide occupational hygiene services related to this topic, such as our noise exposure assessments and helping our clients develop a hearing loss prevention program to help prevent noise-induced hearing loss. And this topic is very near and dear to my heart as well, because both my father and my father-in-law, who were both welders, now both require a hearing aid to help them, get through life and basically hear people talk to them. So it is a challenge. It's very real and it's very preventable. So really want to do our best to prevent that for all of our workers in the workplace. We also have Scott McLaughlin, a specialized consultant in occupational hygiene. Thanks, Scott. He is on the team of occupational hygienists at WSPS, and he'll be working in the background for this session, watching the chat, answering questions, and he'll also sort of try to pull all the questions together. You're welcome to put them in the chat as you think of them, but we'll also have dedicated time at the end where Christina definitely will take all your questions. We want to make sure we get to that as well. So thank you, Scott, for keeping your eye on the chat. And just our regular disclaimer, as always, for copyright issues. And as well, like all our other safety connections, we have our survey. It is posted also at the top of the chat. So to better understand who's participating in our safety connections and ensure we're providing accessible training for all in Ontario, we like to invite you to participate in this short survey. And we collect demographic information on behalf of our funder, the MLITSD. And your responses are kept secure and anonymous, and the MLITSD will not receive any of your personal information. WSPS analyzes the survey results in aggregate form prior to sending them to the MLITSD. And of course, completing the survey or answering any of the questions is optional. to access the survey, you can click the link or take a picture, scan the code, and you just need the function number on the screen there to get started. So thank you very much for taking the time to complete the survey and helping to make health and safety training accessible for all. And just a quick, before we get started, I'd like to review some webinar housekeeping with all of you. Firstly, we recommend you use your computer audio with headphones if you have those, but phone conference is available, and those details are found in the access email you received. And your cameras and microphones will remain off for the remainder of the session. We definitely appreciate your participation throughout the webinar. So within the meeting, you have the options to use reactions like you always do. They're accessed in the menu bar across the top, and they're instant and they float up the screen. So why don't we all give that a try? Can everybody click a reaction with the smiley face at the top and see? Okay, wonderful. It's working good. Thank you so much. We will also be asking some poll questions throughout the webinar, so those will pop up on your screen. Thank you, Jessica. She'll be launching those. And so all you need to do is just click the answer you like and hit submit, and we'll be able to see those results as they come through. Depending on your security on your computers, if that is not accessible for you, you can also just type in the chat your answers as well, so we'll be able to see those. Okay, just a reminder, yes, the chat is, everybody can see that when you're typing in the chat. As well as Microsoft Teams offers the 2 accessibility features, which you may like to access. So to enable the live captions, you can select More from the menu bar, and then Language and Speech, and then turn on live captions. And then similarly, to enable the full screen mode, you can select View from the menu bar, More Options, and then Full Screen. Both features are disabled by following those same instructions. If you have any technical difficulties, please send a message in the chat or respond to the access email. We have people behind the scenes there to help you if needed. I've also heard sometimes issues are resolved if you just log out and log back in. So that might be an easy fix too. Sometimes that works. Our safety connection goals are always these main 4 reasons: to learn, share, and discover what is of value to you, our customers, and our community, to connect virtually with industry peers and facilitate a best practice exchange, as well as being able to attend from your personal space, which I know a lot of people appreciate for sure. So for our agenda today, we'll start off with Christina providing an overview of this year's campaign on noise, and then I will continue on with discussing some of the basics around what is noise and how to recognize, assess, control, and evaluate it. We will end off with how to prepare for the inspection and any resources or continued support that you may need. So we'll just start with one poll question here to get to know you a bit better. What industry do you work in? So you can click which one applies to you and hit submit. And if you are an other, you can also type that right into the chat and we'll be able to see your responses there. Okay, great. Thank you. The majority definitely are from manufacturing and some others as well. Education, construction, catering, mining. Okay, great, good to know. Thank you for doing our first poll. We got that one done. Okay, thank you. So we'll move on now and take it away, Christina.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm here to talk about the ministry's occupational hygiene campaign for this fiscal, which happens to be on noise. So this is it in a nutshell. We're going to be doing proactive inspections to workplaces to determine compliance with the entire noise regulation. So we're not focusing on any specific section of the noise regulation, but whatever sections of that regulation applies to the workplace. Where we're conducting this is really in any workplace where workers are exposed to noise. So we're talking about workplaces in industrial, construction, mining, and healthcare sectors, and really anywhere else where noise is present. This noise regulation is actually one of very few regulations that we managed to get into farming. So the noise regulation applies to farming as well as other workplaces, non-traditional workplaces like schools, first responders, so police officers will also be covered under the noise regulation. So again, really just anywhere where workers are exposed to noise. Our occupational hygienists will be mostly leading these inspections, but there will be times when they will be accompanied by a local occupational health and safety inspector as well. But it's really the hygienists who will be running the show and making sure or determining compliance with the noise regulation. In terms of when we're doing this, it's happening now. Both the education and enforcement phases are occurring concurrently. And the education phase is what we're doing today. We're letting you guys know what we're doing. And then the enforcement phase is when our inspectors and hygienists will be doing workplace inspections. And that had already started. And some of them have already gone to workplaces to do this campaign. In terms of why we're doing this, it's very important. As Tony mentioned earlier, noise-induced hearing loss is a preventable occupational illness. So we really need to try and do whatever we can to prevent this illness. And of course, it results from exposure to hazardous sound levels. And we believe that controlling workplace exposures to noise will help lower the risk of workers developing NIHL. Noise is one of the most common occupational health hazards. It's found everywhere in just about any workplace out there. And it is the most common cause of an occupational disease claim to the WSIB. So just some statistics here for you. In recent years, NIHL represented close to half of non-COVID occupational disease claims to the WSIB. And for a period of about 12 years, over 72,000 claims were allowed by the WSIB. And in 2024 alone, the cost of these claims represented 42% of occupational disease claim costs paid by the WSIB. So for sure, it's a significant hazard with associated significant costs. But also, just as an aside, the noise regulation came into force 10 years ago. So we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of the noise regulation. And we figured it would be a good time to do a campaign on noise to mark this milestone and also just to see the impact in workplaces. There's also the human impact of noise, and this is in fact actually more important than the cost impact of the noise-induced hearing loss claims and associated costs. So when unaddressed, hearing loss impacts many aspects of life at the individual level. So it interferes with communication and speech. It adversely affects cognition. It creates social isolation and loneliness to the person suffering from hearing loss. And there's also a stigma attached to this. And studies have shown that there is an increased risk of developing dementia and accelerated cognitive decline when noise-induced or hearing loss is not addressed. So this is definitely a very important issue that we need to address and do what we can to prevent it. In terms of our campaign focus, this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to assess worker exposure to noise and ensure that they're not overexposed or exposed to sound levels greater than our LEX 8, or I'll talk about that in a minute, of 85 dBA. And we will be doing that by doing both qualitative and quantitative assessments. Our hygienists do have sound level meters to do a quick check of noise levels in the workplace when they're doing their inspections, but they may also conduct noise dosimetry or issue a requirement for the employer to do a noise survey. And then we would emphasize the hierarchy of controls when we're doing enforcement, specifically making sure that the employer had considered engineering controls and work practices first before resorting to hearing protection. So when we walk into a workplace and there's noise and everybody is wearing hearing protection, that doesn't necessarily mean compliance. We will dig a little bit further and ask the employer additional questions of where the noise sources are coming from and what they have done to control those noise from an engineering control point of view. And then if the engineering controls are not practical or feasible to adopt, we will allow the use of hearing protection, in which case we will make sure that there is training on the selection, care, and use of the hearing protection, and that also the hearing protection selected are appropriate for the noise levels the workers are exposed to. And finally, we will also be ensuring that warning signs for noise are posted at every approach to an area where sound levels regularly exceed 85 dBA, which is a requirement of the regulation. In terms of the regulation, which I've actually gone through already, it's small but mighty. There's really only 4 sections to it. There's section 1, which is the definitions or interpretation. Section 2 is the meat of the regulation that talks about all the requirements of the on the employer and the workers. And then section 3 talks about training and instruction, and section 4 talks about hearing protection devices. We do have a guide to our noise regulation on ontario.ca, and the link is on this slide if you want to just go on ontario.ca and search for that. That gives you more information regarding noise measurements, interpretation of the regulation, and also a little bit about noise reduction rating and some controls. Some definitions here, just basic definitions that you need to know. So decibel is a unit of measure for sound pressure, and it is a logarithmic value, which means that you can't add or average it the same way you would a typical number. And the official definition is a unit of measurement of sound pressure level that is equal to 20 times the logarithm to the base 10 of the ratio of the pressure of a sound divided by the reference pressure of 20 micropascals. That's a lot of words, and you don't really need to know that unless maybe if you're still in school. But just know that decibel is the unit of measurement that is being used for sound levels. Attenuation is the reduction in sound pressure level upon the ear. So we would be using or looking at attenuation when we're determining the appropriateness or the suitability of a particular type of hearing protection to the situation in the workplace. And then dBA is a reading of a sound pressure level on a sound level meter that is in the A-weighted network. So the decibels can be weighted, and I believe Tony will talk more about this later on, but dBA is a weighting that closely resembles the way we hear, so the normal hearing attenuation that we experience. So for all intents and purposes, when we talk about sound levels, we're talking about dBA. This equation is in our regulation, and it tells you how to average the noise levels that workers are exposed to. So for most workplaces, the sound levels are not consistent throughout the entire work shift. Their workers are exposed to different sound levels at different durations. So we need to average that to be able to compare their exposure level to the occupation exposure limit for noise. And this is the equation that needs to be used because, as I mentioned earlier, sound pressure levels or sound levels are logarithmic. So you do need to do this calculation in order to determine the average. In most cases, you actually don't really need to do this because whatever instrument you're using, most of the time will give you the information that you need. It will do the calculation for you. It will give you the average exposure, noise exposure for the worker. So you don't really have to know this or use this, but just know that it is in the regulation. 85 dBA is our exposure limit over 8 hours, and this is just another way of looking at it. So you can look at it as 85 dBA average is the allowable noise dose for an 8-hour shift, and we're using the 3 dB exchange rate, which means that for every 3 dB increase of the sound level, you cut the allowable exposure level by half. So for example, if you're exposed to 88 dBA, you are only allowed to be exposed to that for 4 hours. And the same way for 91 dBA, it's only for 2 hours. And then for 94, it's only an hour. So you can be exposed to higher levels of noise as long as you decrease the duration of exposure. There is a table in our noise guide that outlines all the different levels of noise and the allowable duration of exposure if you want to reference that for when you're doing your noise assessments at your workplace. And then section 2 is where all the duties are for the employer to protect workers for exposure to noise. Section 2, subsection 1 is just your general duty clause that says that every employer shall take all measures reasonably necessary in the circumstances to protect workers from exposure to hazardous sound levels. And then section 2, subsection 2 talks about the hierarchy of controls. So engineering controls first, followed by work practices and administrative controls, and then hearing protection subject to certain conditions that are outlined in the regulation. Subsection 3 says that when you're assessing noise levels in your workplace, you cannot consider, you should do it without regard to the use of hearing protection devices. So what that means is if you're taking a noise measurement and say you measure a noise level of 90 dBA and your workers are here wearing hearing protection that has a certain noise reduction rating that reduces their exposure to below 85 dBA, you might think, okay, we're good, we're in compliance. But no, the fact that your noise levels without the use of hearing protection are at 90 dBA, that means that you're in contravention. So that's what that subsection means. And then subsection 4 talks about the 85 dBA over 8 hours. And subsection 5 is actually not complete here. It should say the subject to subsection 6, workers can wear hearing protection under these circumstances. So when engineering controls are not in existence or not obtainable, when they are not reasonable or practical to adopt due to the nature of the work, and if engineering controls are rendered ineffective because of a temporary breakdown or in an emergency situation. So things like situations where this would apply would be something like construction, where the nature of the work is transient, it's always changing, the tasks may be short-term, the exposures are intermittent, so it's really not practical for them to implement engineering controls in that situation, in which case we will allow the use of hearing protection. This subsection talks about posting warning signs at every approach to an area in the workplace where the sound level regularly exceeds 85 dBA. The information that needs to be on the signage is not prescribed. So what we're looking for here is something that would catch the worker's attention, that would relay the message that this is a noisy area, it's a loud noise area, and you need to wear hearing protection or do something to protect yourselves. So I've just put some examples here. You know, we're not endorsing any specific ones here, but just give you some examples. It could be any color, yellow, red, or orange. It could have the word warning or caution on it, and they vary in the amount of detail that can be put in these signs. So it could be as simple as just saying high noise level area, or it could be and then hearing protection required, or it could be more specific, such as double hearing protection required, or in some cases, some workplaces would even write the actual noise level that's found in that area. So it's really up to you how you want to post or what you want to put in your noise warning sign. Just again, make sure that it'll catch the worker's attention and it has the appropriate information on it. Section 3 talks about training. So this is when we've determined that engineering controls are not practical or feasible to adopt, in which case hearing protection is allowed, but you need to make sure that workers are trained on the care, use, and limitations of the hearing protection, that they know how to put the hearing protection on properly, so to ensure proper fitting, and that they do inspection and maintenance, and if applicable, cleaning and disinfection of the device. For example, if it's a reusable device like an earmuff. Proper fitting, I just want to make a note on this, and I think Tony will mention this as well. You may not have heard that Alberta has in their regulations fit testing for for hearing protection devices. There is such a thing as fit testing for hearing protection devices, and Alberta had put it into their regulation as something that workplaces are required to do. I just wanted to let you know that that's not currently in our Ontario regulation, and as far as I know, there are no plans of putting it in there, at least at the moment. Things could change in the future, but as of right now, it is a best practice, but not necessarily an absolute requirement of the regulation. Section 4 is the hearing protection devices. So again, if we've determined that engineering controls are not practical or feasible to adopt, hearing protection are allowed as long as it is appropriate for the sound levels that the workers are exposed to, and they have the appropriate attenuation, and that they're being used in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. So you're probably aware that a lot of these hearing protection devices have a noise reduction rating that's kind of written right on the package. And that number is not a direct subtraction from the noise level that the worker is exposed to try and determine what the attenuation level is, or how well the worker is being protected. That number was based on, sorry, Tony, I'm stealing your thunder here because I know you're going to explain this in a minute, but that number was determined under ideal laboratory conditions. So to put it into practical real life situations, you need to derate it. And we're using the CSA standard for derating. It's in our guideline. Our guideline talks about how to do that. So that's something that you will need to do to determine if your hearing protection device is appropriate for the noise that your workers are exposed to.
Great.
Just one more slide. So these are common orders that we issue. Section 2.4 is the one that says, workers must not be exposed to levels above 85 dBA. And this is usually a compliance plan order, which means that we give the employer time to figure out if how they can implement engineering controls to reduce worker exposure to noise. You might remember that I said earlier that hearing protection alone is not acceptable usually. So we are looking to make sure that the employer has considered everything else, engineering control specifically, before they resort to hearing protection. So we will give them time to do that, and that would be under a compliance plan. Section 2.6 is if the engineering controls are determined to be not practical, in which case we will, if they're not already wearing hearing protection, we will make sure that the workers are wearing hearing protection. And 2.7 is the posting of the visible warning signs. Section 3 is training. And Section 4 is the hearing protection, proper selection of hearing protection devices. So again, it's not a very big regulation, so we would tend to kind of issue orders in pretty much all sections of the regulation. Just a couple more orders that we may issue under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. We could issue an order under 25(1)B, which tells the employer to maintain equipment in good condition. And in this context, it could be things like earmuffs. If in their rough shape, we might issue an order for the employer to make sure that they're in good shape, or maybe get new ones. And then also for engineering control. So for example, if a worker is operating a large piece of equipment like an excavator, and they're operating it within a cab, and the seals on the door of the cab are not in great shape, allowing noise and possibly dust, possibly silica to enter the cab, we would issue a 25(1)B order for that to make sure that that is repaired to make sure that the worker is properly protected. And then 54(1)F is the requirement that I mentioned earlier, where if we're not sure what the workers' noise exposures are, we may issue a requirement for the employer to conduct a noise survey. And by this, we mean usually a full shift dosimetry conducted by a knowledgeable, competent person, and competency is determined based on the individual's education and experience and knowledge. And ideally, it would be good to see if to make sure that it's being done either by or under the supervision of somebody like a certified industrial hygienist, a CIH, or a registered occupational hygienist, or an ROH. So those are the things we're looking for in terms of competency for the person doing the noise survey. We also have a limited budget within the ministry to do these surveys for workplaces. And by doing them, we mean we would subcontract at our expense a consultant to do the noise survey for the workplace, and so that way we can assess the worker's exposure to noise. We typically do that for smaller workplaces in most situations, but there are some exemptions as well. But for the most part, we do issue requirements to make sure that the noise is properly assessed in workplaces. And that's it for me, Tony. Your turn.
Great. Thank you, Christina. I'll just take control back. And there we are. Okay. Thank you, Christina. That was a great summary. As mentioned, the regulation is quite small, but very impactful, and really appreciate your thoughts on, what the specific orders would be. So employers can definitely be prepared. So our next poll question: what are your noise concerns in your workplace? We'd really like to sort of understand what's top of mind right now for you. in terms of a noise hazard. So you can pick all that apply if you like, or even if there's another one, you can click other and type it right into the chat. Just curious, what are you seeing in your workplace? So thank you. Lots of answers coming in around hearing protection being worn properly. Yes, that's definitely a common issue we see when we're walking around workplaces. I've seen often if those yellow ones in particular seem to be half falling out, or that, they're not in there good. Very common problem. People not being able to communicate, that's another high one. Hearing loss, definitely. You might hear this, no pun intended, from your workers that they're experiencing this already. Okay, so I appreciate all those thoughts as we go through. So I'll just do a quick high level, what is sound versus noise and kind of how it all works. You've probably heard this phrase before. Sound is what we hear, and noise is really an unwanted sound. And really the difference depends on the listener and the circumstances of that sound. So something that is quite nice and sounds nice to me might feel like an annoyance or, more of a noise racket to somebody else too. And this is a great illustration that CCOHS has on their website, and a big thank you to them for their permission to use some of their information in our presentation today. So sound is produced by vibrating objects. So as it reaches the listener's ear, it reaches the listener's ear as a wave. So when an object vibrates, it causes slight changes in air pressure. So these air pressure changes travel as waves through the air and produce sound. So thinking of a drum being hit by a stick, the drum surface actually starts to vibrate back and forth, and you would be able to feel that. So as it moves forward, it's pushing the air in contact with the surface. So that creates a positive or a high pressure by compressing the air. And then when the surface moves in the opposite direction, it creates a negative or lower pressure by decompressing the air. So as the drum surface vibrates, it creates those alternating regions of high and low pressure, and those pressure variations travel through the air as sound waves. And then it's the hearing mechanism in our ears that will sense those sound waves and converts them into information, which relays it to our brain. And our brains are amazing. They interpret that information as sound. So our hearing mechanisms in the ear is extremely sensitive and enough to detect even small pressure waves. And it's also very delicate. And this is why loud sounds are either, really high sounds all at once, or louder sounds over a longer period of time can damage our hearing and lead to hearing loss. So frequency, it is the rate at which the source produces those sound waves or completes a cycle of high and low pressure regions. Or in other words, frequency is the number of times per second that a vibrating body completes one cycle of motion. And the unit of frequency is measured in hertz. So frequency is an objective physical property of sound wave, whereas pitch is more of a subjective way your brain interprets that frequency. So in short, frequency is measured where pitch is more perceived. So a low pitched or more of like a bass sound has low frequency, and a high pitch or a treble sound has those high frequencies. And a healthy young person can hear sounds with the frequencies ranging roughly from 20 to 20,000 hertz. And human speech is usually in the range of 300 to 3,000 hertz. So sound pressure is the amount of air pressure fluctuation of a noise source that it creates. So we hear or perceive sound pressure as loudness. So if that drum is hit very lightly, the surface moves only a very short distance and produces a very weak pressure fluctuation and a faint sound. If that drum is hit really hard, its surface moves further from its rest position, and as a result, the pressure increase is greater. And then to the listener, that sound is louder. And as Christina mentioned, we, as occupational hygienists, we really don't talk about sound pressure. We convert these and discuss decibels instead. So you can see in this handy little chart here, compares the two units of sound pressure. And you can see it has a very wide range from 200,000 pascals down to 0.00002. And because this range really is so large, it's converted to decibels, which is which compresses that scale using a logarithmic formula, which you saw, Christina, that formula is right in the legislation. So when converted to the decibels, there is a much more narrow range from 200 down to 0, and it's really a much more workable, usable, or understandable number for us all to work with. So you will see in all of our noise monitoring, our noise exposure assessment reports, we always report the sound levels in decibels and dBA to be even more specific. So we'll talk about what is this A all about, and Christina mentioned. It's a weighting of sound levels. So there's A, C, and Z. Okay. And these are really three different frequency filters that are used in the sound level meter to shape the noise measurements according to how the human ear responds to sound, or really to measure the sound without any filtering if you want to. So it depends on what you want to use it for, which filter you apply. Right. So they really differ mainly on how much they are attenuating low and high frequency noises and what applications they're intended for. So the A weighting, which we always talk about when we do the noise exposure assessments, so we say dBA, it mimics the human hearing at normal sound levels. So it heavily reduces the low frequencies used, and it's always used for those hearing risk measurement assessments. The C weighting factor is a flatter response. It includes more of those low frequency energies, and it's used often for more like peak or impulse noises and evaluating low frequency rich environments. And then lastly is the Z weighting, and they say completely flat. There's no filtering. It's used when you need the true or unaltered sound spectrum for things like engineering controls and research applications. So we mainly deal in A. So here's a couple other nice pictures to explain how noise-induced hearing loss can happen. So sound waves enter our ear through the outer ear, and they travel through that narrow passageway called the ear canal, which leads to the eardrum. The eardrum will then vibrate, kind of like that drum picture we saw. So eardrum is a very good name, from the incoming sound wave, and then sends these vibrations to three tiny bones in the middle ear, where you can see on the picture there. Those are three tiny little bones. So the bones in the middle ear there, they couple the sound vibrations from the air to the fluid vibrations in the cochlea of the inner ear. In this cochlea, here's this snail shape filled with fluid. So there is an elastic partition that runs from the beginning to the end of the cochlea, splitting it into an upper and lower part. These partition, it's called the basilar membrane because it serves as the base or the ground floor on which those key hearing structures sit. Okay. So once the vibrations cause the fluid inside the cochlea to ripple, a traveling wave forms along that basilar membrane. And the hair cells, the sensory cells sitting on top of that basilar membrane, they kind of ride the wave. So they're going to move with the wave. And as those hair cells move up and down, microscopic hair-like projections, known as that stereocilia, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, those are perched on top of the hair cells. They bump against an overlying structure and they'll bend. And that bending causes pore-like channels, which are at the tips, and they open up. When that happens, chemicals rush into the cell, creating an electrical signal. So that signal then, the auditory nerve carries this electrical signal to our brain, which then translates it into a sound that we recognize and understand. So again, thank you for the permission to use those great pictures. So that's how we hear sound. So what is noise-induced hearing loss? Well, it really is hearing loss because of loud sounds. It is very different from hearing loss that everyone sort of gets as we age. And it's very interesting to learn that when you do audiometric testing, they can tell by those results of what you can hear and not hear, what is noise induced because you're losing certain frequencies compared to it and just regular aging. So they can tell the difference. Okay, but the key points really to know is that loud sound absolutely can damage those hair cells in your inner ear. It could be caused by a single intense noise like an explosion, or a little bit lower but still high noise over a long-term situation. So symptoms, people might start to, their hearing might start to sound muffled. They might start to have difficulty hearing people talk. Those certain frequencies, you start to lose the ability to hear those. And you may also be getting ringing in your ears, or even like a feeling of fullness in your ear. So it definitely can happen at work, but it can also, high risk sources of other loud noise could happen outside of work as well. You know, things like really loud concerts, firearms, you get the idea. Anything that's really loud can damage your hearing. And it is 100% preventable. So we need to do better for our workers. We got to tell them about this, and we have to give them the right tools so they can protect their hearing, right? So they don't end up like my father and father-in-law struggling to hear their family talk to them, right? So you prevent it by limiting exposure time potentially to loud noises, reducing the volume even better, eliminate, right? We're going to get rid of those loud noise exposures altogether if we can. And if not, we got to reduce it. And like Christina mentioned, the personal protective earplugs, those are a last resort and extremely important that they fit properly. Because if they're half hanging out of your ear, they're not getting that noise reduction that you think you're getting because they're not actually fitting properly. So just some key information we've got to get right to prevent hearing loss. Some of the health effects Christina mentioned. So just to mention that definitely you can have ear trauma where you have pain and loss of well, they call it temporary hearing loss. The good news with that is that it can actually be temporary. And if there's enough time, gradual recovery, when the person is in a quieter place, they can get complete recovery at that stage, but that can take up to a couple of days to happen. The really unfortunate one is the permanent hearing loss, also known as the PTS, permanent threshold shift. And those are things that your audio, when you get the audiometric testing, they're telling you if you have any of these shifts. So they'll be able to, again, tell if it's noise induced or if it's just part of the aging. Most people do not even notice an impairment at first, right? Hearing impairment is only noticeable when it is substantial enough to start interfering basically with your life, right? At that stage, you're starting, I can't hear people talking. At that stage, it's permanent. It's irreversible. It's hearing damage, and it's too late to get that back. But at least at that point, it's still not too late to make things worse. Like you want to preserve what you have, right? So all is not lost if you start to detect some of this hearing loss. So again, this noise-induced hearing damage, it cannot be cured by any medical treatment, and it only worsens as the noise exposure continues, right? So you can stop it from getting worse. Okay. And the tinnitus, many of us have probably experienced. I remember my first concert I went to as a teenager. The next day I had this ringing in my ear, and I'm like, what the heck is that? So, some people describe it as ringing or buzzing, but that really is a bit of, it's your body telling you that those hair cells, right, have been damaged and at that point, if it's not been for too loud for too long, it's likely that temporary and you haven't done damage yet. But that tinnitus, it can last. It can become quite a problem for a lot of people, and it can really be quite annoying. There's also non-auditory health effects, like these physiological effects stated here. It's just like an automatic response that we have to a loud noise, right? And it's just something that we automatically do, more like we're trying to protect ourselves. So all of those things also could be happening to your body when you're exposed to loud noise. It also definitely can have performance effects in the sense that you're really you can't perform your job, or you can't do your job well, you can't live your life well if you are struggling to hear people. It can become very annoying when you can't hear, and it absolutely can interfere with your job. Uh, Loud noises, it might stop you from hearing not only the person beside you if they're trying to, connect with you about your job, but also you might not be able to hear those warning signs, or that the horn beeping that that forklift is coming. So there's a lot of potential bad things that can happen, not just noise affecting your hearing. So we'll move on to talking about the race model and how it applies to noise. So maybe a thumbs up for everybody. Have you heard of RACE before? It's a very common health and safety. Great. Oh, thank you. Hands up. Yes. And your thumbs up. Thank you so much. So it is a very structured approach that you can take really for every health and safety concern in the workplace, really. So in terms of noise, you can have anybody in your workplace can start this process. You don't have to wait for an occupational hygienist to come in. You basically start by recognizing, do we potentially have noise? Do we need to assess it, right? How loud is it? And then determining on those results of that assessment, what kind of controls do we need? Are we nice and low? We're sitting at about 80, or are our levels now 85, the legal limit, and we really, or above, we must put in some controls and make sure our people are not being overexposed. And as Christina mentioned, the Ministry of Labor is not happy if you're just giving people a hearing protection, right? They expect you to understand your noise levels, how high it is, and do what you can to bring those levels down under the exposure limit of 85. And then, of course, you can see it's like a picture. The last step is evaluate. Are your controls working? What are our levels now? Have we put in new engineering controls? Or maybe we've even bought new equipment that's so much quieter. So putting in all your controls and then doing some sort of reevaluation of your noise levels would be a great way to close that loop. And it's kind of ongoing. It never ends. It's like a circle, continuing circle. So a little bit about recognize. How do you know if noise is a problem in your workplace? Well, you can start with a qualitative noise assessment. And that's really just a systematic way to assess noise levels in your workplace, like a tabletop exercise. You're not taking measurements yet. You don't even need a monitor, a sound level meter yet. You're just walking around doing a survey with people, talking to people, and getting a sense of similar exposure groups, or we call those SEGs. We're going to group them. You know, we've got these locations where our workplaces are. We've got different departments. What kind of exposures do we have in the departments? Is it all the same? Is it different? So we're really just trying to figure out where are these unique exposures to noise, right? And that can help you start to prioritize, well, the ones that are the loudest, definitely you want to start there, right? Or some quick wins, you know, that kind of thing. So this helps you start to prioritize your time and where potentially you may need to do quantitative. So actually have someone come in and do a noise survey, noise monitoring. That means the same thing. Noise exposure assessment. All those terms mean the same thing. We're measuring the noise in your workplace. Other things to consider, of course, are worker reports. They're just coming to you. They're telling you that they're having concerns ringing in their ears. Maybe they've even had some hearing loss already. WSIB statistics are there, and as we heard, it's a big problem. Over half of the illness or disease claims at WSIB are from noise-induced hearing loss. You can discuss it with other colleagues in the same type of workplace that they may have similar experiences and maybe even great suggestions for controls for you. And absolutely, if the Ministry of Labor's been in and they've laid orders, you know you have a problem and you've got to figure it out, right? And just some additional words about some things to consider when it comes to hearing loss. There's also something called autotoxic chemicals, and it's not mentioned in our regulation, but these are basically chemicals or potentially some different medications, drugs that can have an effect on your hearing. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Also, vibration, especially whole body vibration, that can actually potentially have health effects and impact your hearing. Other things to think about is even your equipment. Are you purchasing new equipment? Have you thought about buying quiet? Do you check in with how loud is your equipment before you buy it? Or even the maintenance of your existing equipment. So just some things to consider. And of course, like I mentioned, when you're doing your training for your workers on noise, definitely take that opportunity to educate them on what noise is and why it is so important to prevent it, because you're not going to get it back once it's gone, right? And to include the non-occupational noise exposures and the importance of protecting yourself off the job as well. So those autotoxic chemicals, they call these really kind of like ear poisoning. They work very differently than noise-induced hearing loss. It's caused potentially hearing loss through medications or chemicals. So once those chemicals or medications are absorbed by the body, and that could be through inhalation, ingestion, absorption, or injection, they can travel through the bloodstream up to the inner ear, where they then can cause that temporary or permanent injury, right? And they attack different parts of those cell structures. Okay, so just to be aware of those. Here's a list of some of them that are potential autotoxic chemicals. And we do mention these in our noise reports every time we do a noise exposure assessment. And we ask you about them. Do you have any of these? But they're at the moment, so you won't find these in the noise regulation. And there currently really isn't this universal list of what chemicals are autotoxic. However, you definitely can find out a lot of information about them on the CCOH website. We also refer to the ACGIH TLV booklet where they talk about autotoxic chemicals. That's the booklet that we also consider when we do the air or chemical exposure assessments as well. But here's just a few to give you an idea of what those might be. Okay, so we've recognized we potentially have a noise issue. Now we need to assess it. How bad is it, right? We need to really understand how loud it is. It's extremely important because not only you got to make sure you're under the legal limit, but it also will dictate what kind of noise reduction rating you need, what kind of attenuation you need your workers to be wearing if you get down to that point where you need hearing protection. Okay, so we need to assess it and we need to do a good job of it, right? So developing a noise exposure assessment strategy, talking to a hygienist, we would ask lots of questions. You can see listed here. And we're really, again, trying to understand your workplace, to develop a good strategy to understand those unique, the similar exposure groups, to develop a good, thorough monitoring strategy. So we're going to the right places in your workplace. We can determine ahead of time how many dosimeters we need, how many pieces of equipment are we going to want to check, and make sure we do a good, thorough job. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be given a report, and you want to be confident that this is reliable information and you've captured all the information you wanted to about the exposures that your workers might come across. So making sure we connect with the right people. And just a quick word on who should do the assessment. So like Christina mentioned, it needs to be someone that's competent, right? Somebody that has knowledge and training to do that type of work and experience. So she mentioned also the CIH or ROH designations. Those specific designations, those people definitely have had lots of schooling. They've written the big exams and they've gotten the designations. But there's also people that may also work in, like our workplace as well, that have not yet received those designations, but they absolutely have worked with us and they've been trained how to do it. They have experience with the equipment and they understand the in and outs of how it all works. And our reports are also we either hygienist does it, or if we have someone without those designations, but they have the knowledge and training to do it, those reports are always reviewed by someone with a designation mentioned here. And it's super important that those people understand how the equipment works, the importance of calibration, and actually do the calibration properly on site that day. And they know how to interpret the results and make good recommendations for future controls. And absolutely, if you need hearing protection, you need to make sure you're getting the right calculation to get the right hearing protection noise reduction rating. So here's a few pictures on some of the equipment that we would use. We could use a sound level meter, so you can see that number one. Those are great for we walk around your workplace and walk right up to your pieces of equipment. We would usually stand where a worker would stand, right? What would be their typical exposure if they were standing beside that equipment? So you can get that very specific information for each piece of equipment, if that's useful for you. But as Christina mentioned, the dosimeters are extremely important, where the worker would wear them all day long. And you can see it gets attached to the outer side of their shoulder, and they wear that all day long. because noise goes up and down. They go for lunch. We ask about that. What if you're going to be going off site and cranking the music in your car? We don't want you to have that if you're leaving. But if you're just spending the day in your workplace at the, a normal lunch room, that you just wear it all day long. And of course, we talk about how to wear it, anything to be concerned about. We don't want people putting their jackets over because there is a microphone there. So that always needs to be accessible, nothing rubbing on it because that would skew the results. There's also, you can do an octave band analysis if you need that type of information for your workplace, and we could do frequency, that type of analysis as well. So what to expect on that, if you do have a noise assessment, very similar to if you do an air assessment, we always ask the JHSC worker rep to be present at the beginning of the testing. They're always invited to ask questions and make sure they understand that, why we're there and what we're doing. We need an escort throughout the day to show us all those pieces of equipment so we know we're capturing what you're looking for. Again, absolutely explain to the workers how to wear it, how the equipment works, and what to do, what to do and not to do. And we watch people work, and we're really just taking in and noting for the report your current controls, what you have, checking on those dosimeters, making sure they're running properly, and of course, taking those sound level measurements throughout the day. A lot of people ask about, what about the app on my phone? Can I trust it? Well, we definitely say proceed with caution on those apps. They currently don't meet any of those ANSI standards or CSA standards for measurement. So there's a CSA standard on using the proper equipment and what that looks like. They could be useful. They're kind of fun to see what, as you walk around, potentially as a screening tool. You see the noise goes up when you're walking around. Oh, that one definitely is louder. But I really wouldn't trust the output that it's giving you. Because our hygiene team actually did a little exercise one time, and we had different apps on our phone and a consistent noise source, and it was crazy, the difference, even within 10 decibels, what each app was giving us. So not very reliable. There is a free NIOSH sound level meter app, which is good, but it is only good if you have a proper external microphone and it is calibrated. So, kind of our feeling, once you're going to all of that important detail, you might as well get a proper sound level meter. And, because it is extremely important to make sure you're measuring it properly and you can trust the results. And you always need to calibrate your equipment, and it needs to be the right kind of equipment with the right weighting, right? That A weighting that we talked about. Okay, so moving on to controls. Hierarchy of controls. Again, maybe give me a thumbs up. You've heard of this before. Where do we start? So maybe type in the chat for me, see if anybody's who's still with me. Where do we start for controls? What's the best place to start? Elimination. Thank you, Courtney. You've got it. Everybody jumping in there. Susan, Lynn, Deborah. Okay, thank you. We absolutely, if we can, we start at the top and we work our way down, right? Decreasing effectiveness. We don't want to rely on people to wear hearing protection, right? Is it fitting right? Are people remembering? Is it falling out? So many things can go wrong. So starting at elimination, right? You just want to think about that. Can we actually get whatever's really loud in your workplace? Can we change our process? Can we get rid of that? Maybe it's possible, maybe it's not, but you want to think about that and explore that. Or substitution. You still maybe need some sort of piece of equipment to do what you do, but can we purposely buy quiet? Going forward, start that even in our purchasing program procedures. We're always going to ask and think about that when we buy new equipment. Ask, what's the noise output? those kind of things. Because as you can see, this little chart, there's lots of different kinds of sanders out there, and they all have quite a variety of noise being emitted right from it. So it's definitely worth the time to look at those potential other pieces of equipment that might be a lot quieter. And then we're moving down is engineering controls. Okay, so you've got your equipment, you've got to live with what you've got for now. What engineering controls can we put in place, right? So that is putting something that your equipment is still loud, but I'm going to put something around it, put some sort of barrier, isolating material, lots of different things. I am not a noise engineer that can do this, but we can direct you, and help you look for those if you are in need of this. This can make a huge difference and way better, again, than requiring people to wear hearing protection. Administrative controls, that's all around signage. It is a legal requirement, like Christina mentioned. You've got to have those signs posted at the entrances or, before people go in so you see it. The ministry will be looking for those, right? And then providing training. That is an administrative control. So always educate your workers what noise is all about, why it's important, and why they need to pay attention to protect their hearing. And another administrative control is even just worker rotation, not having that person in that loud environment all day long, if possible. Can we get them rotated out into quieter workplaces? And just a quick note, as Christina mentioned, the training and instruction that you provide to your workers must be detailed, right? So it's specific. The ministry might be asking, show me your records of your training. What did you cover? Who did it for you? Who attended? Right? Did everybody get this training that needed it? So be prepared and make sure you do a good job of this. And you can reach out to your suppliers to help with this training. You can reach out to us. We absolutely can help you do this. You don't have to do it alone, but there's nothing that is prescriptive of saying who has to do it, right? But you just have to do it right, and you need to cover these topics. And then lastly, controls. Personal protective equipment. There's so many different kinds of earmuffs and plugs and things. I'm sure we're all very seen lots of different things. But again, last resort. How do you go about picking your hearing protection? Well, you definitely want it to be comfortable. People need to like it, otherwise they're not going to wear it. Right? It absolutely needs to fit properly, because if there's not a good fit, the noise is going to go right through it and then start to affect your hearing. It absolutely depends on the noise level in your workplace, because that's going to dictate how much noise reduction rating you need for your hearing protector. Okay. You might have special communication requirements as well. Do you need to have some sort of microphone or something in there where you can talk to other people? So the supplier, I would connect with them, tell them about your needs, also how it fits with other PPE, right? If you have safety glasses, hard hat, if you have a lot going on, respirator, right? It all needs to work together. So have those discussions with your supplier and make sure you get what's going to work for your needs. Right. This is just a quick slide to discuss what Christina mentioned already about the need to do de-rating of that noise reduction rating. So maybe what I basically want you to take away from this is that you can simply not subtract the noise. So say you did a noise exposure assessment in this area, it came back at 86. You cannot just subtract the noise reduction rating on the box, like 28, 32, it's not a simple subtraction. And that is because that noise reduction rating was based on laboratory settings in perfect scenarios. So that we have to correct for more about real world situation, as well as it needs to be you can see the -3 factor. That is for the A weighting, right? Those NRRs were designed using a C weighting data. right? So there's just a bit of an equation, and the ministry's guide is great. This is the snip right from there, and they give you an example how that works, and we absolutely go through this with you in our noise reports, and we can look at the different areas, how loud it is, and make sure each one is properly protected. The goal, again, is that you get the noise exposure down below 85. That's legally required. But actually, when you look at best practices and we put in our reports, we recommend getting it below 80. So between 75 and 80, I would say is optimal for protecting your hearing. 80 to 85 is considered acceptable. But as a best practice, we always recommend get that noise reduction rating under 80. And you don't want to overprotect either. If you get below 70, you could be overprotecting people and they won't be able to hear potentially, that horn from the forklift coming by. So this is extremely important and you want to get it right. So people are not overexposed to noise or overprotected that they can't hear warning sounds. And then the last step is always evaluate. So you've done all of this work, you've put in your controls. Well, you want to check, were your controls effective, right? So doing potentially another noise exposure assessment. Have we now decreased our noise levels? We don't even need hearing protection. That's the best scenario, right? Get worker feedback. Is it working well? And you're always looking for improvements. So it's this cyclical process that we go through. So just a quick word on best practices. What is missing out of the noise regulation? We do have a CSA standard, Hearing Loss Prevention Program Management, Z1007. It is a written hearing loss prevention program. You may have also heard the phrase hearing conservation program. That's more of a US term. So in Canada, we call it the HLPP. We highly recommend writing one of these and for it to include audiometric testing. It, as Christina mentioned, not a legal requirement here in Ontario, but as time goes by, who knows, one day it may come to Ontario, but it has already been made law in Alberta. Right, so that's something to consider if you're wanting to work on best practices here now and do your best job to protect your workers' hearing. So there's just a quick snip, not a snip. I laid out the key sections of what a hearing loss prevention program would include in it. So basically, you're just saying, here's your program. You're going to measure the noise. You're going to control it the best you can. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's the type of hearing protective devices. Here's how we do that well, and so on and so on. So you want to make sure you're keeping good records of those training. And this program, like everything, you're monitoring as a continual process. Audiometric testing, I just want to say, it is an excellent way to evaluate your hearing loss prevention program or evaluate how well are you doing to protect people's hearing, right? Because you're going to get information back. Are people losing their hearing? If everybody in all the departments, they're good, years have gone by, nobody's getting hearing loss. Well, woohoo, that's perfect, right? That's great evidence. Your efforts are working. However, if you start to see trends, people are starting to get hearing loss, and again, the audiometric testing will tell you if it's from noise. That way you can take action and know you need to do something better, quicker, before people's hearing gets worse, right? So it is a great way to evaluate what you're doing. And best practice, Christina mentioned this. I can't say enough about FES, the short form, Field Attenuation Estimation System. This is fit testing for your hearing protection. And for me, it's just brilliant. Like it makes sense. We all have different size hands, feet, different size of gloves, right? My ear canals are way smaller than my husband's, right? It's shaped different, the size. So I'm pretty sure my hearing protection is going to be different than what my husband needs, right? It's not going to fit the same. So what this does is actually measures a personal reduction rating. So they call it the personal attenuation rating. So you're going to, manufacturers now offer this. It is a legal requirement in Alberta. But basically, I did this at one of our PIP sessions. We had one of the manufacturer suppliers at one of our booths. So we're talking many, many years ago when I first started to hear about this. And I had had loud exposure. And at that time, the hearing protection I was wearing it wasn't fitting. It did not fit right. You know, it was just the ones everybody used. But anyway, I went right there. She did this, gave me different types to try. Turns out the pushing kind fits my ear best, and I got excellent um, attenuation. Like it stopped the noise, and you'll be able to see exactly how much that protector gives you. So I can't say enough about it. It's so important. Hearing protection is not going to work if it's not fitting you properly. Okay. So that's enough about that. You can tell I'm get emotional about this one, but it is highly recommended around the world now. Tips to prepare. So we're going to make sure you're prepared. What to expect during inspection. Like all Ministry of Labor inspections, they're there to enforce the act and the regulations. They have the right to enter, and so you want to let them in and be nice as possible, of course, right? Yeah, they'll introduce themselves, why they're there, and they're going to ask for both a worker and a management member walk around with them during their inspection. They may ask, they do administrative review or also a physical inspection while they're walking around. So administrative could be things like looking at your paperwork, right? Tell me about what kind of training do you have? Show me the training. When did you do it? Any documents they might be asking for. Have you done noise exposures in the past? Let's have a look. Are they still current? You know, those are some questions they might be asking. But also physically walking around. If they see people and it's really loud and they can do if the hygienist has a meter with them, they easily will be able to tell how loud things are. And they will be able to see if hearing protection's half falling out of people's ears as well. So if they find a contravention, it is their job to issue those orders, right? They explain the contravention and also refer you to your Health and Safety Association for assistance to help you figure it all out. And they absolutely have the power to stop work when there's an immediate threat to workers' health and safety. So that is always part of what they can do, right? But they will leave you with your orders, being very clear about what was discussed, and provide that copy to you to be reviewed with your worker rep or your whole committee if you have a committee. And of course, you need to comply with those orders. So just last couple slides here, tips to prepare, basically read the noise regulation. It's super quick, and their guideline, the ministry's guideline, is excellent. Review any previous noise exposure assessments, determine if you need one. Is your old one current? Have you had changes? Make sure it's done by a competent person, and put in all your controls like we discussed. How we can help, absolutely one of our main things is we can help by coming out and doing a noise exposure assessment, doing both the dosimetry and the sound level meters on your equipment. We absolutely can help you build, we call them building blocks. We have about 35 different topics, but basically these are templates that we can offer for you for hearing loss prevention program, which is great to do. We have some resources developed already, which you can see listed here. But I also wanted to just take 2 minutes to ask you our last poll question. What additional resources would you like from WSPS on noise? Because we want to be as helpful as possible. So just wondering if any of these things would be of interest for you. Some things we thought about potentially doing is another toolkit to put everything about noise in one document, doing that FAQ document again with Christina around all those FAQs, and potentially even, developing, a specific training to help support those MLITSD orders that you might be getting, or any other ideas you can type right into the chat. So thank you. I see them coming in here. Toolkit is definitely a great idea. Okay, FAQ document, maybe not as important, but the toolkit will have the FAQ. So maybe we lump those in together. Okay, and some ideas, some people would be interested in potentially help with their training as well. Okay, thank you very much. So those were the main slides. Just a quick note, wanted to let you know about this amazing link on the WSIB website called Tone It Down. In particular, I love the How Old Are Your Ears? It's a great thing to go through. It blew my mind. I did it with my daughter, who's much younger, and you could see as you go down the decades, we both could hear everything lovely. But as you move down the 10 years, all of a sudden I couldn't hear the tone and she could. So it was really neat to do, to experience that. And that's about just the normal hearing that you lose as you age. And there's also a noise calculator on the OCAL website, which you might find interesting, helpful. And here's our CSA standards that are regard to noise. So just so you're aware of what CSA standards are out there, and our additional resources and links. And we will be posting this. We're recording it, and we'll be posting it and offering another session in June as well, opening it up. So now we've gotten to our questions. So if we don't mind, if thank you, Christina's on, and we can look at all potential questions that you may have coming up. So Scott, I'm looking at the chat here. Okay.
I sent Christina some preliminary questions through email. Did you get those, Christina?
Yes, I did. So I'm just going to start going through them. We'll see how many we can cover. So one of the questions was, what are the top typical orders under the regulation? That was in my presentation, but let me just narrow down the list further. So the top orders usually are section 2, subsection 4, which talks about maintaining exposures below 85 dBA. So again, that's usually a compliance plan where we would give the employers time to figure out engineering controls and other things they can do to reduce work exposure to noise. And then there's also signage. That's also a common one that we issue. And this is not in the noise regulation, but under the Act, the requirement to do the noise survey. So those are probably, I would say, the top 3 orders it would issue related to noise. And then there was a question about, do you know if electronic safety earplugs are an acceptable form of hearing protection according to the MOL or MLITSD? We have an employee who would like to use these, but we are unsure and don't want to set a precedent in the workplace, and they are compliant with ANSI. So I saw an answer from Randall addressing that. So yeah, and I agree. And Randall, I think you might be more knowledgeable about this than I am. I agree that just because it's ANSI doesn't necessarily mean it's CSA approved. Now we do expect hearing protection devices to be to satisfy the requirements in the CSA standard. That was in the chat as well. So we typically do not really explicitly approve hearing protection devices, but we do look at them to see if they meet the minimum requirements of the regulation. So the onus is on the employer to provide us with the information based from the manufacturer or from the standard or somewhere else to demonstrate that whatever it is they're using is appropriate for the noise level that the workers are exposed to. So I can't really, I guess, comment specifically on that particular type of earplugs, but I did see Randall's answers. So I would suggest reading that, and I think it's quite informative. And then are noise canceling earbuds, headphones a compliant form of hearing protection when the sound level is greater than 85 dB? Short answer is no, or most likely not. And I did see an answer, I believe from Randall as well, and then from Scott too. Yeah, they're really not designed for industrial use and for the purpose of protecting workers against noise that is found in industrial settings. Having said that, though, we can't ignore technology, right? It's always progressing, it's advancing. And at some point, or maybe we're there now, I'm not sure, I'm not knowledgeable of all the things that are options that are out there right now. There may be something, some kind of form, it's a different type of hearing protection that may be acceptable in certain circumstances, as long as they meet the CSA requirements. So there's a lot of things to consider out there. And like I said, it's really on the employer to demonstrate that whatever they're providing is appropriate and satisfy the requirements. What is the law on employees wearing headphone earbuds while working? Can we have a policy on them using one headphone in at a time if they are working? They wear hearing protection if they are working with tools, just not when they are working at their bench with no tools. And there was a mention of the Apple AirPods Pro, which interestingly enough, we were just talking about that internally as well, because we do like to see what's out there in the market. That's why I mentioned technology is advancing. There are more and more products out there that might be appropriate. We're just not sure yet at this point. But as far as the policy goes, that's really up to the employer to enforce. It's not explicit in the regulation that you have to have a policy for certain things, but the overall expectation is make sure your workers are protected from noise. So whatever that looks like in your workplace. The situation that you indicated here sounds kind of interesting, I guess, and I'm not sure it would be generally be acceptable. If they're exposed to noise, they need to be properly protected, but really it's up to you to do an assessment and determine what controls you need to put in place to protect your workers. Okay, let me see what else I can see here. So I did see a couple of questions regarding WSIB. Unfortunately, I can't really speak on that because we're not really, I can't speak for the WSIB, that's the bottom line. However, I've made a note of your comments, and we do have a group within the ministry that works with the WSIB and their policies, and I will pass your comments on for them to address. Okay. And sorry, I'm just going by memory here. There was also a question about how often to do noise surveys. So it's not prescribed in the regulation. The best practice is once a year if there are no changes in your workplace or the hearing protection or the sources of noise and things like that. But best practice is once a year or more frequently as needed. But again, it's not a regulatory requirement, it's a best practice. There was also a question I remember about how often training is to be done, if it needs to be done annually. So again, that's not prescribed in the regulation. However, so the answer, I guess, would be training as needed. Best practice, again, is also annually. However, there is something in the Act, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, that requires the employer to review their training programs every year. So you have to look at your training programs every year, but you don't necessarily have to train them every year unless there's a need for it. But best practices every year. If you're reviewing the program, you might as well provide the training again. Okay. And Scott and Tony, please help me out if there are any specific questions that I should be focusing on.
I think you've touched on most of them, Christina.
Oh, okay.
I think the only one was audiometric testing legally required in Ontario, and I think we've already talked to that.
Yeah. Tony talked about that. It is not a regulatory requirement. It's a best practice, so something that you can consider as part of your hearing conservation program. Okay.
Great. Well, those are all great questions. Really appreciate your input, and that just makes us better and better able to develop this FAQ document. And if you think of any other questions, you absolutely can email me or Christina and I. We will be working on developing that FAQ and have it up on our website for everybody to access. So I think if that is it, if there's no more questions, we are almost right on time. So thank you. Thank you, Christina, for joining us today. And thank you, everyone, for participating and bringing your questions. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. And good luck with preventing noise-induced hearing loss. Thank you.
Thank you.